So I have a question for you guys. Where does government derive its authority? Where does it get its power? Can someone share with the class what they think? Power lies where when it comes to the government? Any ideas? What gives the government power? Don't everyone talk at once.
Is it like
What was that, Kaylee?
the people?
The people, right? I mean, imagine if you've got a king, right? And they're the king is all by himself, but he has no subjects. How much power does he have? Right? He's got no more than you or I would have out in the woods by ourselves, right? So it seems fairly clear, right, that the king derives his power, or the government. You know, how much power would Donald Trump have if we didn't have anyone in America? If it was just him, with no one to read his tweets. That'd be very sad for him, and probably happy for the rest of us, unless you love his tweets, you know. So where does government derive its power? That's the question that we're going to be asking and maybe answering today. And it's actually potentially more complex than you might think, right? We believe as Americans, as good Americans, that power comes from the people. But is that what's always been believed? And is it true? Let's look at that together. So at this point, I'm going to be sharing the screen with us once again here. And we're going to be asking the question, where does the government come from? Where does the government get its power? Sharing the screen with you now. Okay, so what I have right here, does anyone know what this book is?
The Bible.
Holy Bible. Now you might say, Mr. Cook, what are you doing with the Bible? Isn't this AP US history? Yes, it is. And we have to go to the Bible to try to figure out, where did people believe government's power came from before the Americans got there? And so we're going to turn to St. Paul. How many of you have ever read any of St. Paul's writings before? Let me see your hands. How many of you have read the book of Romans before? It's kind of a classic as far as biblical books go. I mean, it beats Numbers every time, let's face it, or Leviticus. How many of you ever tried to read Leviticus and wished you hadn't? Yeah, you're like, this decision to try to read through the Bible, yeah, whoops. Yeah, let's face it, that's the only reason you'd ever read Leviticus. Okay, so let's look at Romans 13 here really quick. By the way, if Leviticus is your favorite book, yeah, no, it's not. It's not no one's favorite book. Okay, let's look at what St. Paul says here about the government, where its power comes from, and what, as Christians, our role is. Everyone must submit himself to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. Romans 13, by the way, in case you hadn't noticed from your screen. And if that, by the way, wasn't clear enough for you, let St. Paul say it again. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Consequently, he who rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted, and those who do so will bring judgment upon themselves. So according to the Bible, according to Paul in Romans, where does the power of the government come from? Someone tell us.
God.
Comes from God. Does it come from the people, or does it come from God? According to Paul, it comes from God. But you might say, but I mean, Mr. Cook, when the government exercises too much authority, right? Too much power, too much influence over you, don't you have the right to revolt? I mean, what if the government goes so far as to tax our tea? Not the tea. Don't tax the holy tea. Do we have the right then to rebel? Well, good news for anxious Christians here. Paul tells us. Uh-oh. Wrong page. Don't worry, Paul tells us. This is why you pay taxes, for the authorities are God's servant. Give everyone what you owe him. If you owe taxes, pay taxes. If revenue, then revenue. If respect, then respect. If honor, then honor. Well, guys, what do you think? The Bible says that we ought to pay our taxes, maybe even if our tea is taxed. You know what I'm saying? So where does the authority of government come from? Believe it or not, before the 1600s, pretty much everybody in the Western world believed that the king's authority came from God. Why? Because the Bible tells you so. And this is where we kind of get our idea of the divine right of kings. Now, you probably don't have this idea because as a good American, we've been taught that power resides with the people. God appoints those who are in power, and people should submit themselves to the governing authorities because God gives those people the authority to rule. And as a subject under the authority of a king or a prince, your vocational role as a subject is to submit. And the king's vocational role is to rule well for the good of his people in Christendom. That's the belief. And so then, and I of course asked you this question before, you guys had you've read Romans. Most of you said, yeah, I've read Romans. And yet, if I was to ask you generally, where does the power of government come from? Most of you would say, well, it comes from the people. And yet we've read Romans. So which is right? Does power reside with the people? Or does it come from God? Well, let's let that question sort of hang in the air for just a second and then challenge this idea of the divine right of kings by a guy who comes along and he doesn't believe in God. His name was Thomas Hobbes. He was a little atheist. As one of my professors said in college, he was as secular as a broomstick, which I thought was kind of ridiculous and funny, secular as a broomstick. And he did not believe that God existed. He was an atheist, which was at the time very rare. There weren't a lot of atheists running around in 1666, if you know what I mean. But Thomas Hobbes did. He did not believe that there was a God. And yet he could still recognize that the king had power. Where does that power come from? Thomas Hobbes asked. It doesn't come from God because he's not up there. But it has to come from somewhere because the king definitely has power. And so then he began to approach the question from, let's say, a secular perspective, where there is no religion, there is no God involved. And he actually writes about this in a book that was published in 1666 called The Leviathan. And in it, he talks about the state of nature. And he says, if you think about it and you rewind time, move back in time a long ways to the point where we don't have religions, which, by the way, if you are an atheist, where do you think religion comes from? You think that men made it up, right? That makes sense. Where does morality come from if you're an atheist? You think that men and women made it up, that societies make up religions and make up morality and make up governments and make up ways of living in order to exist and to function, right? That's where these things come from. But if you rewind time way, 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 way back there to the time of, let's say, the cavemen, what is life like for those people? What is life like for a caveman? So imagine you yourself are there in the woods all by yourself. There's no one around anywhere. There is no society. There's no religion. There's no rules. You know, there's only smart things and stupid things, right? Like if you want to fly like a bird, you can jump off of a cliff. It's not really wrong. It's stupid because you go splat at the bottom. Right? And if you run across another caveman, you might say, well, I want what that cave person has, and you might take it. There's no rules. There's no societal rules whatsoever. You can do whatever you want. Like literally, there is perfect freedom in the state of nature. So let me, can I borrow a couple of you for a way of talking about this? And I don't, so I've noticed one thing from my students is sometimes students remember the analogy, but they forget to connect it to both the concept of the state of nature and to Thomas Hobbes's name himself. I want you to connect this little story with Thomas Hobbes's state of nature. I'm taking Thomas Hobbes's ideas here and I'm high schoolifying it. Would somebody like to be a cave person in this story? Raise your hand. Okay, Rochelle is a cave woman. She has a very, very nice cave. It's down by the river, a cave down by the river. It's really great. It's got a stream that flows past, which is really good for fish and for also getting rid of human waste, right? So the cavemen down the stream, they have to deal with that, but you don't. It's a really great cave. There's a really, really comfortable rock that you get to sit on and a really comfortable rock bed. I mean, it's as soft as rocks get. It's as soft as a rock, but it's comfy. And there's art on the walls inside of the cave. Cave art, cave drawings that you've drawn yourself. And it's great, it's great. Every cave person would love to have this. Would somebody else like to be a fellow person in the story? Cave woman Kaylee decides she wants that cave. You see, Kaylee, she lives up on the top of the hill. There's no stream close by. There's nothing really good about it. It's miserable. You know, the vegetation, there's no berries. There's no berries to pick and eat. And so she wants cave woman Rochelle's cave. And so what does she do? She sneaks down there and she decides she's going to take it. Now, keep in mind, there's no societal rules. There's no "thou shalt not murder" rule hanging over her head. There's no guilt. There's no no 10 Commandment guilt there. And so she sneaks in there and she attacks Rochelle and tries to kill her, but she's unsuccessful. She gets beaten back, you know, and she's all hurt and wounded, and she has to crawl back up the hill, and she's probably not going to make it because cave woman Rochelle is, you know, so powerful down there. She had some good, you know, stones to chuck. And fortunately, though, for cave woman Kaylee, she comes across a deer that had been, killed by a cougar and half eaten. So she crawls inside of it and she's like gnawing on it, you know, and she's able to because she has food, she has a source of food, she's able to survive. She still wants that cave, though. So she gets stronger over the next month and a half, and then she decides she's going to attack again. Well, this time, cave woman Rochelle is paying attention, and she knows that cave woman Kaylee is out there. So she's seeing to her defenses, and she's staying vigilant. The thing is that Kaylee just has to kind of drive cave woman Rochelle just a little crazy, and she has to stay awake because that's the only way to protect her cave. And then eventually, cave woman Rochelle gets sleepy and falls asleep. Guys, if you want to know where our ideas of equality come from, it's this. We're all equal because we're all equally weak. Every one of us have to sleep. And in the state of nature, that makes us all equally weak. And so cave woman Kaylee sneaks into that cave and takes that soft rock. And, sorry, Rochelle, crushes Rochelle's head and throws her body into the stream, and she floats away. That's terrible, but it just happened. Okay, would somebody else like to be another cave person in this story? Nobody? Well, looks like Kaylee, she lives. Woohoo! So in a typical place where you guys volunteer for these things, another cave person comes along and kills Kaylee and throws her body into because she has to sleep too, right? She's equally weak. And then somebody comes along and kills them, and then kills them, and kills them, and kills them. You guys see the problem with this? When there is no societal morality, when there is no government to impose rules, you have perfect freedom in the state of nature, and you are all equal in the sense that you all have to sleep, and you're all equally weak. But life in that state of nature is how? What would life be like? Would it be long? Would it be good? Would it be secure? No. You see, in the state of nature, you have the natural right to do anything. There are no rules. And that's the good part of it. You have perfect liberty. However, in the state of nature, and this, by the way, is the famous quote from the Leviathan, life is poor, nasty, brutish, and short. And so Thomas Hobbes does not look to God to answer the question of where does government derive its power and its authority, but he then looks to the fact that historically the cave people have come together and they have created societies and they have created rules in order to move out of the state of nature into society itself. And so where does the king get his authority? The king gets his authority because we give our natural rights born to us naturally with this freedom that we would have. We give all those rights that we have, the right to perfect liberty, to the king. And in turn, the king then does what for us? And it's better for us. What does he do for us? He protects us. He allows for us to live in a stable society. And this is why we should give all of our rights to the king. How many of you are like, yep, that makes sense. I like that better than the authority coming from God. Anybody? Anybody at all? Okay. Turns out there was a guy who was not an atheist. His name was John Locke. He was not a Christian either. John Locke was a deist. You guys know what a deist is? What does a deist believe? Anybody know? Okay, a deist believes that a long, long time ago, I can still remember. No, that's a song. A long time ago, some sort of creator spun the world and the universe into existence. And he created, he, she, it, whatever, created certain natural rules within this, in this existence. That much like if you create a clock and you wind up a clock, that clock will run whether or not the creator is looking at the clock, right? So this God, the God of nature, or nature's God, as was a common way of talking about this deist being, nature's God, created nature and then stepped back. In other words, this God does not step into our existence and tell us stuff, right? This God doesn't show him or it or her or whatever self to us. Does that make sense? Like God set everything in motion and then stepped away. Who knows if he's even still alive? Does that kind of make sense? That's what a deist believes. What's one of our founding fathers who very clearly believed in this deist idea? Does anybody know?
Benjamin Franklin.
Benjamin Franklin, yeah, Benjamin Franklin was in all likelihood a deist. You could also probably point to someone like Thomas Jefferson. Let me be very blunt. Thomas Jefferson was, if any of them were deists, he was a deist. And he's going to follow right along in John Locke's footsteps, which is where it going to lead right to the Declaration of Independence. Okay, so John Locke said, yes, people do have these natural rights. They come from nature, and this may have even been a part of God's design at one point. But people have these natural rights. And if a government comes along and tries to take those rights away, in other words, if a king attempts to have absolute power, then the people can say what? The people have the right to say what? No, right? The people have the right to say, no, king, you do not have the authority to do this. You are ruling on our behalf, and without our consent, you do not have the authority to make arbitrary rules. And so the rights are then shared with the king, but people also have the right to revolt. And so it's from this concept that we get the idea that all men and women are created equal. and they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. These are rights that should not be taken away by kings. What are those rights? Thomas Jefferson tells us in the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence. So the right to life, what else? Someone tell me. Unmute yourself.
And the pursuit of happiness.
Liberty and the pursuit of happiness. Originally, by the way, Ben Franklin changed the phrase from property, because property, those are the things for John Locke. We have the right to life, liberty, and property. And that was changed by Ben Franklin. Thomas Jefferson's original script of the Declaration said property. Franklin changed it to pursuit of happiness. But that's very much where we get the idea, right? That we have these rights. And then what does Thomas Jefferson go on to say in that document? Do you guys remember? He said that governments are instituted among men for the good of men. It's based on the consent of the governed. And if the rights of the people are infringed upon, it is in the right of the people to alter or what? Or abolish that said government. And then what's the vast majority of the Declaration of Independence? It's Thomas Jefferson listing the ways in which he has claimed the King of Great Britain has violated those natural rights, which is why. So we're declaring independence. And the whole point of the Declaration of Independence is to say why. We are declaring independence because our natural rights have been violated. We have tried to ask for redress with the king. He has ignored our petitions, and he's continued to violate our rights. So we have the right to revolt. Power resides with the people. We have the right to revolt, and these are the reasons why. Normally, I would have you guys break up into groups on this, and then to look at the Declaration of Independence and try to figure out what the Declaration of Independence is actually saying. My guess is we're kind of familiar with some of the language, right? When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the bonds, which for such a long time it's bound them together. All men are created equal, and they're endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. We've heard this language before, but what's actually being said there in that? So what do you guys think? Which is right here? Is it the idea that governments are given their authority from God, or is Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, and Thomas Jefferson right? That we have inalienable rights that have been given to us by our creator, whoever or whatever that is, could be the Christian God too, by the way, and that we have somehow the right to throw off governments that we don't like. What do you think? Any thoughts? Kaylee.
I think that God puts people like in certain leadership positions for a reason, but I also think that because we're human, leaders sometimes abuse their powers, and I think that people are able to
Revolt.
Yeah. But
would Paul agree with that, do you think? Maybe? I don't know. Next question. Do you guys believe that our founding fathers or the revolutionary leaders in the United States, do you think they acted rightly from, let's say, a biblical perspective in declaring their independence and then killing British soldiers to fight for their independence because of no taxation without representation? Was that right or was that wrong? And I'm not saying look at the end and say, well, look America now. Yeah. Okay, so who knew that, right? Who knew that was coming? What do you guys think? Were the founding fathers, were the revolutionary leaders, were they right in fighting for independence? I'm going to have you guys vote and see what you think. How many of you say, you know what, upon reflection, no, the Bible said no. You know, you're supposed to submit yourself to the governing authorities, and Paul said pay your taxes. So, I mean, so your tea is actually now cheaper because of the taxing situation, and the British East India Company. Just suck it up and pay the taxes. It's not that big of a deal. How many of you say, yep, they did wrong in fighting for their independence. They violated what the Bible said. Okay. How many of you say, nope, they did right? Sometimes you got to fight for independence. Okay, I've got 1 vote for yes, 2, yep, yep. Okay, very interesting. Oh, there's another yes. How many of you see that would agree that there is a disagreement between the philosophy of, say, Thomas Jefferson and St. Paul? How many see that there is a disagreement there? Okay. If there's a disagreement, who's right? The Bible or Thomas Jefferson? Now, of course, if you say that there is agreement, then I guess, you know, I don't know how that works, but go ahead and make the argument. But if you say that there is a disagreement, is Thomas Jefferson more right than Paul? Any thoughts? How many of you are uncomfortable with this little conversation that I'm having right here because it's challenging some things that you've been taught a long time ago?
Not uncomfortable. I'm just debating whether I should say something or not.
You should always say something.
It's what I've always been taught, and one of the most common things I've heard, especially going around lately, is the importance of the separation of church and state. That's what I've been hearing a lot, and I'm conflicted. I'm conflicted whether I think that you should not try to combine those things because they're always going to disagree with each other, or whether we should just try to like find a way to choose one or the other. I'm conflicted.
Yeah, and by the way, that's not an easy. That's definitely not an easy question to come to terms with.
Yeah.
Because if one then separates church from state completely, and then has the state exist only for secular purposes, it's very difficult to ground any sort of societal morality outside of some sort of like completely relativistic, constantly changing societal morality. In philosophy, that's called the grounding problem. And so any moral philosophy that doesn't have it grounded in some sort of eternal being or eternal truth has a significant grounding problem. And so if one does completely detach the state, the secular state, from the church, then one struggles with having some sort of consistent societal morality. And I think that's actually something that we're seeing right now in the United States. Talk about a very, very quickly shifting societal morality. That is what we are seeing today. Yeah, so I don't know what the answer is. I'll give you my opinion. I don't know. I don't know the extent to which church and state should be separated and what that even means. But it's a good question. Yeah, any other thoughts? Good stuff. Okay, you guys are looking grumpy or something. I thought it was how many find this to be at least somewhat interesting? Like the thinking about where this stuff comes from. Okay, well that's good. The vast majority of you said that you find it somewhat interesting. I think the philosophy of it is really, really interesting myself, and that's still something that today, especially with how volatile things in politics today are, like they are volatile. I have never seen in my life such a volatility in our national discourse. I've never seen such dishonesty from the press, from all of our elected officials, both on the right and on the left. Like it's really a very strange time to live in. And so I think these are good questions. Fundamentally, where does the truth of government's authority come from? It's a good question. Okay, and with that, I'll let you guys go. Please do watch for the video later this afternoon, talking a little bit about the short answer that's coming your way. In fact, I think that's already in your Google Classroom. So please look at that video. I'll try to keep it less than 5 minutes or so. maybe even significantly less than that to sort of point you in the right direction. Please have that at least one or two, or maybe all three of the questions answered for class on Thursday, so we can compare and kind of contrast some of the different things that we have down there as a class. So once again, please at least have one of those done. I'm not officially making this an assignment. It's not going to be officially due until Thursday night, but please do at least have one down for class. And I'll talk a little bit more about the question in the video, and a little bit more how you answer it in the video as well. Okay, that's all I have for you guys. If you have any questions, please go ahead and stay on the Zoom call as everyone else leaves, and I'd be happy to chat with you about anything. So, all right, otherwise, bye-bye.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thursday, could I make up my Davis and Woodman's quiz?
Yeah, absolutely. Thursday or would tomorrow work for you? Would tomorrow be fine?
Yeah, I could do it tomorrow.
Okay, why don't you join us all at, how about you join us at, let's say, 1:10 or so, 1:10.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, bye-bye.